Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. Return of the Apeman, 1944. Out of all of Bela Lugosi's horror movies, the last to be released in the monstrous regiment of his notorious Monogram 9, Return of the Apeman in 1944, remained until recently the hardest of which to track down a copy. Fortunately for Lugosi fans, and indeed bad film aficionados in general, I was able to get a decent print on DVD several years ago. It's certainly worth seeing, but as with many of the notoriously banned video nasties in 1980s Britain, the rarity value is greater than its actual value. According to Tom Weaver, Return was meant to be filmed as part of a proposed actors' stock company trumpeted in the press by Monogram producer Sam Katzman, composed of John Carradine, George Zucco, and Frieda Inescourt from 1943's Return of the Vampire. The two male leads were to be teamed up with Lugosi for this, and then the dull, drecky Voodoo Man, which I've already covered, and which of course was released first. Technically, Return of the Apeman represents the first appearance of this triumvirate in the same movie. Yet, to add more confusion, is the long-debated question of whether Zucco was actually in the film despite being credited. We'll get to this shortly. The title promoted this film as a sequel to the previous year's wonderfully dreadful The Apeman, but mercifully without any connection in plot or character. The director was Philip Rosen, who, although not as fast a sausage factory churner of programmers as the Apeman's infamous William Bodine, was capable of shooting in Monogram's quick, no-frills Poverty Row style. He had just come off the back of helming 2 of their popular Charlie Chan series, and would in total rack up 6 credits in that year. The lack of continuity with the Apeman was a blessing, as the prequel literally made a monkey out of Lugosi, and is often cited as the worst, best reason for the notoriety of the actor's Monogram collection. Here, the failing Hungarian star is accorded rather more dignity by being the instigator of evil and not the victim. Before we get to him, regular listeners to my podcast will know of my penchant for forensic examination of in-film newspaper headlines. Return has a couple of doozies, and opens with an amusing little gem. In order to introduce some questionable morality at work, under the headline, "Notorious Tramp Still Missing," we read that Willie the Weasel, a vagrant, I quote, familiar among downtown derelicts, has disappeared after being driven away by a couple of distinguished-looking gentlemen. Aside from featuring as little newsworthiness to the public as most social media pieces today, unless the reader is one of his tramp fraternity, it contains no geographical details at all. The journalist doesn't divulge an area or indeed the city the event happened in, a technique repeated in a later clipping, leading me to wonder if this is the Anywheresville Gazette. Nevertheless, we soon fill in the newshound's gaps by meeting Lugosi in the role of scientist Professor Dexter and his colleague Professor Gilmore. These distinguished gentlemen have just revived Willie from Dexter's experimental chamber, where, unbeknownst to him, he has spent the last 4 months in frozen suspended animation, without food or water. As a drunk, he awakes in possibly a better state than a typical morning after, and gratefully accepts $5 as a fee on his way out. The results mark a triumphant breakthrough for Dexter, which he aims to build upon by seeking examples in the Arctic of frozen cavemen. Being a Monogram production, Dexter and Gilmore's ship set sail in stock footage polar waters, accompanied by inappropriately jaunty library music, a standard cost-cutting measure that here draws attention to itself more than the usual Poverty Row titles, underscoring the action like episodes of a Flash Gordon serial. Cut to 10 months later, and the scientists are frustrated at their lack of progress. No surprise, as the 2 employees behind them hack away with their ice picks at the set floor as daintily as if defrosting an old fridge. Gilmore the family man tells Dexter that he must return to his missed loved ones. Single-minded Dexter has no such sentimentality. A true scientist is married to his profession. At their point of separation, suddenly an avalanche occurs that by sheer coincidence dislodges a frozen caveman for them. This will prove an inciting incident from which only bad things result. Back home in Dexter's laboratory, he takes a blowtorch to the ice block containing the Apeman, and soon his conscious prized specimen is released. Audiences were led by the poster billing to believe that the bearded, hairy Grizzly Adams that emerges was a shared credit between George Zucco and actor Frank Moran. There is no evidence, however, of any trace of Zucco in the part, except for an on-set still photo that appears to show him made up for the role. Any close-ups of the ape man clearly show what must be Moran's lighter-colored eyes than Zucco's beady dark ones. The voice at times is reminiscent of Zucco, yet could not have benefited from post-production dubbing even if such was possible on a shoestring budget. The studio certainly gained maximum benefit from touting Zucco as an attraction. Arguably, Zucco in turn benefited from not being authentically seen in the movie. There was no such escape from the hilarious face fuzz indignity committed on Lugosi in the original film. It would have been even more cripplingly funny to endure the emoting of a middle-aged Zucco sporting animal skins and furry booties in addition. Regardless, Moran the man goes ape at his revival, until Lugosi resourcefully trains the blowtorch on him, gloating, "You see, fire is his master. He probably never understood it." What Dexter really implies is that he will be the caveman's master, intending to make him his slave to perform unspecified dark deeds. This can only be achieved, though, once Dexter has transplanted part of an intelligent modern brain into him, just enough to give reasoning and speech without obscuring his existing primitive mind. This naked playing of Dexter's true God complex card appalls Gilmore into accusing his colleague of planned murder. "Murder is an ugly word," broods Lugosi thickly. "As a scientist, I don't recognize it." Later that night, a Gilmore home dinner party celebrates the engagement of Steve Rogers, Todd Andrews, to Gilmore's daughter Anne, Tila Loring. As a side note, it may not be a coincidence that both these young leads changed their stage names in the same year that Return of the Ape Man came out, from the credited Michael Ames and Judith Gibson respectively, to protect their later work from B-movie connotations. Andrews would have the longer of the two careers, including Beneath the Planet of the Apes in 1970. To be fair, as the plot unfolds, it's made with no less a workmanlike quality than the standard B-movie medical madman horror, in spite of its absurd developing premise and the occasional amusing unintended detail. The differences between Dexter and his host are at least capably illuminated further at the party by Robert the Ape Man Charles's functional screenplay that supports the two stars playing effortlessly to type. Carradine gives Gilmore his calm, cadaverous geniality, while furrow-browed Lugosi sits at a cold remove from the other guests, judging them with disdain. "Some people's brains would never be missed," and opportunistically eyeing the young groom-to-be. Events move on apace when Dexter drugs Steve in order to make him the donor brain for his shaggy slave. Gilmore breaks off from playing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata for his guests and races to the lab just in time to prevent Steve becoming an eligible candidate for more than matrimony. He threatens Dexter with a gun mystifyingly pulled from his tuxedo trousers. Had he anticipated refereeing a violently contested game of charades back home? "Fool, you'll pay for this," vows Dexter after Gilmore leaves. The catalyst for all hell breaking loose is Dexter experimenting with an electrified steel plate later intended to entrap his associate. The ape man doesn't appreciate being labeled a guinea pig either, makes a bar-bending jailbreak and jumps out of the window. Howler spotters may enjoy the glimpse of his 20th century white underpants as he does so. The city news desk is soon on the case, reporting in another exclusive that a beat cop is subsequently strangled by a weird-looking character in primitive garb with supernatural strength. Once again, with no clues as to where in the world this took place. Poor Professor Gilmore then becomes the paralyzed victim of Dexter's electro-plated trap. Such is his decency that in the face of potentially fatal brain theft, he nobly goes along with it, out of misplaced guilt. If someone has to be the victim of your madness, I'm glad it's me. You have to admire Dexter's dexterity as a surgeon. His resuscitated post-op Neanderthal bears no trace of any skull work whatsoever. Not only that, but seemingly within minutes, the cave slave has shimmied up the ivy outside Casa Gilmore and broken in to play his new alter ego's favorite piano piece. His recital takes a sinister turn, though, and it isn't long before he hightails his hirsute way back to the lab, to sheepishly admit to his master, "I killed Hilda," Ann's aunt. All too late, Dexter realizes he has thawed out what should have remained in nature's freezer. Even the police's bullets have no effect upon the rampaging beast, and he scrappily throttles Lugosi, as he has everyone else in the movie, glaringly bereft of a fight director. Dexter sees the error of his medical meddling just in time to warn the police. "There is only one way. Fire," before checking out in wide-eyed ham death throes, leaving them to clean up his mess. This just leaves a haphazard climax, beginning with the fleeing primate kidnapping Anne and bustling her through an empty theater. Backstage, he takes time out to slap what he thinks is a real warrior for staring at him, actually a Mongol stage mannequin, before taking her back to the lab and inadvertently setting fire to the place to his own terminal cost. Meanwhile, heroic Steve is in tow, backed up by 2 patrolmen. We'd seen the station chief calling out for all units in the vicinity, so we must presume it's been a busy night elsewhere. Return of the Ape Man never stood a chance of being a good film. Any scenario that involves Bela Lugosi pursuing a furry caveman down a city street with a blowlamp is hardly in danger of getting a Criterion edition, but it rattles along at a fair pace, hovering in and out of the entertainingly bad red zone of amiable movie daffiness. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.